And the more he does that, the more he'll be in the mix. But right now, it's a 2-horse race.
Ryan, you guys didn't lose any scholarship players in this spring portal window, but you did have a few walk-ons leave. How much of that is because of the potential of the roster limits and things of that nature? And I guess how tough is it to do that?
Yeah, it's tough because you hear about the 105 and you have to have real honest conversations with young men about whether they'll be guaranteed a spot or not. Then you hear that maybe there won't be a 105, and we're having these conversations in real time. And what I don't want to do is look a guy in the eye and say, sorry, we don't have a roster spot for you, right before the season, when I haven't at least had the opportunity for them to just get in the portal and check out what their options are. And so, we were just being transparent in those situations, because these guys, whether they're a scholarship player or a walk-on player, they still put as much work in. And so I just felt like that was the right thing to do in a time where we don't really know for sure how it's going to shake out.
Marcus Hartman, Dayton Daily News.
I was wondering, kind of along those same lines with talking about Atkinson, what was the final evaluation of C.J. Hicks after the spring that he had? And I guess what does it say about him that he's still here?
Yeah. Well, somebody who loves being a Buckeye. He works, really, really hard every day. Puts in extra work. He was even in there just when I walked in here. He was out there getting some extra work on his own. He wants it, but I think he's made the transition well. When you make the transition from off the ball to on the ball, and you watch Sonny transfer from being at the third level to the second level. When you make that transition from being on the second level to on the ball, things change. And I was remarkable to me how quickly Sonny made that transition. I'm hoping CJ can do the same thing, but it does take time. It's as opposed to being off the ball and running to the ball, you're constantly engaged in blocks or looking to avoid them. He did a really good job in the pass game. He's growing in the run game, learning how to set the edge and get off of blocks. But we're encouraged with what we see, but again, it's going to have to be a big summer for him. And I know he and Mick and Larry are talking about exactly what the right get better at. And so they'll go out there and work on those things, and we try to help as much as we can in terms of those improvements, but then also is just the overall understanding of the offense. When you have the cut-ups to watch, and you actually see yourself doing it as opposed to Will doing it or CJ, or we have years of cut-ups of the same plays over and over again. You can see Dwayne running it, or Justin Fields running it, but when it's actually you doing it, it looks and feels different. So, the technical parts I won't get into, but for all three of them, it's really about understanding the offense better, understanding protections, understanding the route structures, how the ball has to come out, third down, red zone, understanding the entire offense. We put a good amount in, but there's still a lot that we haven't put in, so we need to continue to dive into that. Ultimately, they will be evaluated on how they make their routine plays routinely, and then how they do on third down, red zone, and 2-minute. And you've heard me say that before, but that's it. And each guy has a different skill set, and so we've done that before, where we've adapted based on who we have, and we'll do that this year. But it's going to be exciting because we have some really good weapons coming out of the spring. We feel like maybe even a little bit different than we've had in the past. So, fired up about that, and fired up about where this offense can go. And I have to make sure I remind myself that the idea of the spring, again, you've heard me talk about this, is to get individual players better, and then as we come out of the spring, figuring out what this looks like as an offense and as a defense schematically. So that's what we're all involved with right now. Coaches are on the road recruiting, but it's also part of that. The guys in the building right now, we're starting to put that together as we head into June.
For Tavian, when it's experience, it's holding him back. He just has to get experience. Is there any way to simulate that this summer?
I know.
What you can do to get that?
Man, I try so many of those different things, and this is a long conversation. But even having a son who's now a sophomore and who's a quarterback, you just realize that if you play basketball, baseball, lacrosse, all these other sports, you constantly play games. You could play 5 basketball games on a weekend. You could play, I don't know how many lacrosse games they play, but they play a lot. Soccer, my daughters, they play all these soccer games. How often are you actually playing 11-on-11 football and playing the quarterback position? And I think that's why you see so much, back and forth, confusion. It's just not very much a science, even when you get to the NFL and the draft process, because these guys haven't played a lot of football, and so you don't know where they are. You don't know always how to compare where they've played to where they need to play, the types of throws that need to be made. So I think about this a lot, and Tavian, needs to get as many of those reps as he can. We've tried in the past. We've tried the virtual reality, where when I was in San Francisco, we would actually, have people, simulate defenses, simulate blitzes, so they could stand in there. We'd actually put the turf down, and they'd have the VR, and they'd be going through the reads, and it wasn't the same. It's just not the same when a 320-pound guy's trying to rip your head off in front of you. It's just not the same. So what do we try to do? We try to watch as much film as we can, and try to simulate it the best we possibly can. But there's nothing like getting real reps, and that's why we made the guys live this spring to feel what that was like, because these guys haven't played a lot of football, and so they don't know what that's like. So I'll go off for an hour about this, but this is the kind of the world we live in, and something I'm passionate about. So the more these guys can play 11-on-11 football, it's better.
We need to keep it to one question, because we have a lot of guys that want to ask. Spencer Holbrook, Letterman Row.
Right now, you've had a couple weeks to digest what you saw in spring practice. What were your evaluations of Matt and of Tyler as first-time coaches here, and what do you think the next step for both of those guys?
Matt Patricia and Tyler Bowen, yeah. First off, I think you look at the players, and I meet with every single player after the spring, and I ask them, rate your relationship with your position coach, with your coordinator, 1 to 5, 5 being great, 1 being not very good at all. And the feedback I got on both of those guys was excellent, really good. That's the first thing. Second thing is, in recruiting, you talk to the recruits, how's your relationship with Coach Bowen? How's your relationship with Coach Patricia? Again, like thumbs up across the board. And I think, when you get around the players, you get around the recruits, you guys will hear the same thing. You can either it is or it isn't. We've had coaches before where it hasn't been great, and I think we know that's been the case before. So that's the first thing you look for, is the relationships. And then how are you getting individual players better? I think that's been a plus. And then schematically, we'll see. We have, yet to be seen. If we have the right scheme in place. But I like their attitudes. I like where they are. I think they fit our culture really, really well in terms of how they coach. They understand it's important. They both coach in the NFL at a high level. So excited to see what the next couple months bring.
Joe Nugent, WCMH.
From a team perspective, what do you want to see, what do you need to see between now and the start of fall camp?
Well, we have these different phases. Right now, we'd like to see these guys get out of here and get away from football for a little bit. Classes started for us during the Texas week, so if that gives you any idea of how much break they got. So we got right into winter workouts, right into spring practice. They did have a little bit of a break for spring break, but these guys need to get around their families a little bit and get away from football. But then once classes start up again, we got to go. We got to have a great summer. Everybody knows what they need to do this summer in terms of with Coach Mick in the weight room, in terms of getting better individually as players. And then, once August hits, it's got to be a great camp, as we know, because of our first opponent. So that's going to get ramped up real quick. So we need a great summer. And that's obviously a big part of that's in the weight room. You guys have heard me talk about guys being gold or being Iron Buckeyes. There's a reason why Jeremiah Smith was the first Iron Buckeye ever as a freshman. He saw what happened, right? So there's a correlation to the summer that they have and how they play on the field, and they know that. They bought in. I think that's really important. Our guys do understand how important what goes on in the summer, what goes on in the weight room, impacts on the field. So that part of it, and then Mick will do a good job of creating conflict and then figuring out who the leaders are. That'll be big, and then having that synergy within the team.
Dave Holmes, WSYX.
Yeah, I wanted to get your reaction to tying the mark with 14 guys drafted, the way that helps recruiting, and also is there a guy that you just were kind of getting angry as the draft went on that you thought this guy's sliding way too far? Were you going to bat for one of your guys, so to say?
Well, I don't think Seth, should have gone undrafted, but I think the Achilles and maybe just being center only is why that happened. But I'm pleased with the location that everybody ended up with. I don't think there was really anybody that got drafted where when you look at it, you say, man, that's not a good fit. And that's when I stood up in front of the personnel for our pro day, that was our goal. It isn't like so much, getting them, drafted early or whatever. They have to decide the value, but make sure it's the right fit, because we always say it's easy to get in the NFL. It's hard to stay in the NFL. So we need these guys to now stay in the NFL. The easy part's over. The hard part is now going to work, endearing themselves into the program, and then bringing value every single day. So we've got unbelievable feedback from so many NFL personnel about our guys, and it was clear that these teams appreciated and valued how unselfish they were, how much they praised their teammates, their football IQ, how much they loved Ohio State football, the program, the run that they went on, and just their overall character. And again, just got so much great feedback about that, and you can see how much the teams valued that.
Adam King, WBNS.
This is the first spring where you've had the expanded playoff, so you were trying to balance that out. Looking back, is there anything you would do differently? How do you guys think you handled the reps and dealing with the fact that these guys got done playing on January 20th?
No, I mean, the only thing that happened in the leading up to the national championship game was, we had a really good rhythm going, and we would practice in pads on that Tuesday and Wednesday of the game week. But our D-line, Tyleek and those guys, they were banged up. I mean, it was late in the season, and so we did not do that on one of those days for a reason, because we wanted to be healthy and fresh going in on Saturday. But when you're into such that rhythm, sometimes when you get to Saturday, it takes a little while to get your feet underneath you. And I felt like that hurt us a little bit in that first drive. But then again, you look back, you need those guys to be fresh late in the season. We're talking about week 16. And other than that, I thought we hit the sweet spot. I thought our guys were playing fast. I thought the way that we handled the season, the preseason, allowed us. I mean, you look at the way the running backs played late in the season. They were playing fast, and so I mean, we have a lot to learn from, a lot of information now to go back on, because it was the first time ever. So we'll at least have something to look back on. But I think a lot of it went the way we wanted to.
Rob Aller, Columbus Dispatch.
Yeah, Ryan, setting X's and O's aside for a second, I think you said earlier you had something different or special in mind, maybe a book you were going to have guys read. I don't know if you had a chance to get that to them, and what are you trying to achieve with that kind of thing?
Yeah, so they still don't know that yet, because it's going to be when they come back, so I won't say the name of the book yet, but the idea of the book is that guys who were not in leadership roles the year before need to now carry the water. So that's important, and I think it's different when you're actually in that role as a leader. And so, we're going to try to use that as a reference point, just to try to help them understand that when you're a leader, like, you have to take on the burden of being the leader. It's one thing to sit in the back and watch somebody else do it, because we lost a lot of leadership. Now, we do have some guys who are stepping up in a big way, and they just need more opportunity. So that's going to be the summer project.
Pat Murphy, 24/7 Sports.
Brian, you mentioned earlier when talking about the quarterbacks that you guys have maybe different weapons this year. Could you elaborate on what you mean by different weapons?
Well, I think it starts probably at tight end, where we have more options there probably than we've ever had since I've been here. So that's exciting. We have some different styles of wide receivers, and we're building some depth at running back as well. So that part is fun, and James really did have a good spring. It's hard to tell when you're in the spring on running backs when we're not really tackling as much to the ground, what that looks like. But I thought, we didn't tackle as much James to the ground, but we did with C.J. Donaldson. I thought he got better as the spring went on. And I thought Bo Jackson showed a lot for a freshman as well. So So that was all good. Sam Williams-Dixon's fighting. He's had some good practices. I thought he got better. And then we'll have Isaiah getting healthy and then Turbo coming in. So more depth in that room as well. You're talking about 5 guys there when we haven't always had 5 guys in the running back position. You guys remember sometimes we had like 2 or 3, So I think Locke's done a nice job of building depth. We have depth in the tight end room, and then we have some different styles of guys in the wide receiver position. So again, where does that go? We'll see, but some good players to work with.
Andy Anders, 11 Warriors.
Yeah, just wanted to get, coming off the spring game, having a chance to evaluate the film, your feeling on where the offensive line stands and specifically the right tackle competition.
I thought our guys appreciated the way that, we have Tyler, Marcus, and Charlie all working together with the O-line. And I think it's important when you have 3 guys with 3 different backgrounds come together. They have to have one voice if they're going to work like that together. Again, in the post-spring meetings, asking all the offensive linemen what they thought, and it was unanimous, like excellent. They loved it. So that was great. So I feel like they got better this spring. I feel like they're getting coached well. They made improvements across the board. The idea of playing a primary position and then a secondary position has been really good. I thought Austin did a nice job moving around. I think he really took a big step for us. And so, I don't think we're in a position to really get into like who's starting and who isn't. But he really, and at what positions. Austin Sayrell is going to be a starter for us. He's an excellent player. Really had a good spring for us, and we can talk about them as we get closer to preseason. But at right tackle, Phil Daniels I thought got better from practice 1 all the way to the end, and that's an example of somebody who's playing against Kenyatta Jackson and Caden Curry and C.J. Hicks every day in practice. Who just continually got better, especially in his pass protection. So big summer for him as well. But I thought Tegra, Carson, Luke, Ethan got better. I mean, Josh Padilla got better. There's a lot of guys there that I felt like were really improving on a day-to-day basis. So, I feel like, sometimes you look at it and you're like, okay, if Tyleek and Ty were in there, what would that look like? So you have to compare that part of it, on each side. I think the defensive line did win some battles in there, but I would say overall, the offensive line probably won more than they lost over the spring, and so that's a big emphasis going into the summer is, with that D-line is shoring up that depth and making sure those guys are playing at a high level. So sometimes, again, in the spring, you're not sure, where to give the credit or the blame, but I thought they competed overall and got better.
All right, Nick Walker, Letterman Row.
Ryan, you mentioned coaches being on the road earlier. How pivotal is this time when recruiting with the evaluation period leading to spring camps and just what you guys are able to learn from it?
Yeah, I think we have to do a better job now than ever of evaluating. I think maybe in the past we've selected, quite honestly, but we got to evaluate now more than ever because of the way things are structured. So this is a very important time for our staff. We've got to get out there and make sure that we're evaluating these guys at a high level to come in and play all types of different roles. You may have a guy who's coming in to make an impact day 1, and you may have a guy that's coming in to be a developmental guy that maybe we're expecting to see on the field in year 2 or 3. All just as important. Just like when you're in the NFL draft and you're drafting a guy in the 6th and 7th round, those are important decisions when you're bringing in undrafted free agents. So we all know that we got to hit on the first rounders, but then there's all these other guys along the way, and so that's kind of how we're looking at it. It's becoming more and more like the NFL. So evaluations are critical, and we got to make sure we're on point with that.
Joey Kaufman, Columbus Dispatch.
And the fact that you didn't lose a scholarship player in the transfer portal window this spring, just what allowed you to kind of retain the roster at a time when that's not a guarantee, and just what you made that ultimately end?
Yeah, I thought it was. It says a lot about our team. I think stability is very, very important, and it's always important to be transparent in recruiting, but now more than ever, what you say you're going to do, which is your character, what you say you're going to do, you have to back up. And I think, we've done that. And the other part of it is, when we recruit guys now, like, we want guys who want to be at Ohio State. You know, if we have to talk you into coming to Ohio State, if money's the first thing you're looking for, this isn't the right place for you. And if people choose Ohio State because they want to come to Ohio State, they're more likely to stay. And so that's just a philosophy that we've had here, you know, for a long time, but now more than ever because of the way things are. And I think, you know, guys enjoy being at Ohio State. They like being here. And so as long as they're being valued, then they're going to stay because they know the development.
Tony Kirkman, Buckeye Hub.
It sounds like the judge in the House case isn't going to approve the 105, so you guys should have more players. How will you? Are you guys talking about that? How are you planning on filling that out? And what kind of scholarship number are you looking at right now? And is that coming from Ross? You know, how do you put that together?
Yep. Yeah. So we're looking at, you know, increasing it to 90. That's, you know, what the conversations have been. And then, like you said, you know, it's difficult when, you know, you think it's going to be a 105 and now they're saying maybe it won't go to 105, but if it does, we better make sure we can pivot quickly. So, we'll operate, you know, if the 105 cap isn't put into play, we'll operate right around 120, 121 like we've been. So, yeah, those are kind of the parameters that we're working with right now, knowing we might have to pivot quickly, which I know is tough for a lot of those guys who are on the fence. So that's kind of why we wanted to make sure we were transparent. Again, you know, but this is kind of the way it is in college football right now. You got to be able to adapt quickly and move on the run. And the easy thing to do is throw up your hands and get frustrated, but you know, we'll just adapt and try to, you know, communicate well and make sure we have everything we need.
Dan Hope, 11 Warriors.
You were asked about Bo, you were asked about CJ. Obviously, you also have Kenyatta and Caden coming back, and you added Logan George. How do you feel like all 5 of those guys can kind of coexist in that edge rotation?
Yeah, I think you know, we've always done that, and we've always rolled guys. I even think when I first got here in like 17, we had all those guys, Taekwon. I mean, it was just, you know, Bosa. We used to roll those guys, and the more we can do that, especially with the length of the season, we're going to need to do that. You know, I'm sure, you know, Larry wants to be able to do that. So that'll be important. And I also think, you know, there are different, you know, skill sets of those guys that we can try to be creative, and that's one of the reasons why Matt's here, is to, you know, find out what they do best and then get them on the field and do that. And I think that's exciting as we head into the summer to figure out what that looks like. Just like on offense, you know, you try to put the guys in the right position to be successful. It's our job to do that now because numbers-wise, when you look at the guys on the defensive line, I think we're now at like 18. So that's a big number. So we got plenty of guys to work with. So now we got to figure out what they can do well, and that's coaching.
Stephen Means, Cleveland.com.
You've had years where you started with a non-power 4 opponent. You're talking about how the Texas game is. You've also had years where you started with a top 5 opponent. Does that at all change, I guess, the sense of urgency of how quickly you guys want to get things done when you're not starting with a let's see what we find out game? You're starting with essentially a playoff game in August.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question. Yeah. You know, I had a chance when I took my son down to Clemson, and I spent all the time with Dabo last year. They were opening up with Georgia, and they were just talking about how different that preparation is. You know, that preparation for that game starts in June, and then, you know, it goes into July, and then, you know, August you're cracking pads because you got to be ready to go in that first game. That's just how it goes. So it does certainly start the preparation earlier. Everything's you know, ramped up sooner, and well, you can tell. I mean, I've been talking about it now since, you know, we started spring ball, you know, because you just know. So especially when you have some new guys, new faces, you know, they got to be ready, and it's the job for the coaches and the leaders to make sure that that urgency is in place.
Does it make you want to pick a starting quarterback quicker?
No, because you still have to have the focus on the long term. This is a long season. But that being said, we're going to do everything we can to make sure we have the right person in that place to go win that first game, and then we'll go from there.
Got time for a couple more. Bill Rabinowitz, Columbus Dispatch.
I'm pretty sure you're not going to tip your hand even if you know it, but in your mind, do you have a front runner at quarterback?
No.
It's completely 50-50. Is this is the first time that you had this situation? You had Kyle and Devin a couple of years ago, and they kind of went back and forth.
Yeah, that's probably the closest one. Yeah, yeah. We'll kind of see. I felt like Lincoln going into the spring game was a little bit ahead of Julian, and then I thought if you just watch the game, Julian probably performed a little bit better than Lincoln during the spring game. And here we are, you know. So gone back through, watched the spring practices, look at the grades, they're very similar. So we'll take it into the summer, you know, and we'll let them play. The more you play, the more these things find a way to you know, work themselves out. So who knows? Who knows how it's going to shake? My guess is they're going to need each other. You know, we're going to need Tavian to come as well. He's got to be able to help. It's going to be a long season. And we're not talking about, you know, someone like Will, who's, you know, a fifth-year senior, who's, you know, 22, 23 years old, who's just been around, you know, that was a long run he went on, you know, so we need depth in that room.
Final questions, Tim May.
I'm going to guess War and Peace. Is that the book? You're going to have these guys?
No, not War and Peace. It's a long one.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be funny. Or not funny. Where did you see Julian improve the most from beginning of spring to the end? What caught your eye just specifically about him and his game? Because like you said, in the spring game, he seemed to really sort of come alive. I mean, I know things are generic and stuff. But.
Yeah, I think for Julian, you know, he just has to go play, and the more he's in those roles, the more he can let his competitive nature come to the surface. And I don't know if that answered your question, but like that's to me where he has to just be the most competitive guy on the field. And you know, when you know what you're doing and you have experience and you have, you know, comfort level, then all of a sudden those things can come to the forefront. And I think the more comfortable he's getting, the better he's doing that. I felt like he did take a little bit more command in the huddle. I felt like he took more command at the line of scrimmage, because when I say command, it's coming off of a guy who had tremendous command, and he knows what it looks like. And so whether it's barking out the cadence or, you know, looking guys in the eye in the huddle, or, you know, after a play, getting everybody back together, whatever those, on the sideline, whatever those things are, like, that's the leadership skills. We all see he's got a beautiful release and he can throw the football, but that's just part of the process. And so that's part of bringing along a quarterback, and that's the fun part.
Yeah, you don't want to say gamer, because that makes it maybe too simple, but some guys do rise to the occasion, right? I mean, that's your big juggling match, I would think, as much as anything.
So I did this study when I was with the Eagles, when I was with Sam Bradford, and it's called the Roy Hobbs myth, which is really interesting because if you ever watch The Natural, you know, the story of The Natural is that, you know, he hits this home run, breaks the lights, and he's running around the bases. But the true story of Roy Hobbs, if you read it, is nothing like that. And so, you know, I did a study on that because, you know, for quarterbacks, you're trying to get them to rise to the occasion. But the truth is that, like, nobody really rises to the occasion. You really fall back on your training. When you look at, you know, Mr. October, Reggie Jackson, you know, he pretty much hit his career average during those moments. When you watch Jordan or LeBron, when they're in those moments, people who are clutch, they're pretty much just operating under their career average. They're not doing anything extraordinary in those moments. Now, there's the other side of it. Sometimes the moment can be too big, and you can do, quote unquote, you can choke, you can struggle. But if you can just sink to the level of your training and be at your, you know, career average during those moments, you're going to be better than the majority of them. And so I think, like, that's what it comes down to when you're playing a quarterback. Like, whatever we see in practice, if we can see that in a game, good things are going to happen. If we start to see, like, crazy play all of a sudden on the field that we haven't seen in practice, now there's something else going on. Is there anxiety? Is there whatever those things are? We have to get other people involved and figure out what those things might be. So again, a long answer, but like that's it. We just want to see the same things we're seeing in practice on the field during the game, and it's our job as coaches to make practice really hard. And I think the quarterbacks would tell you, like, I try to make practice like almost brutal for them. Like, they miss a throw and like I'm just undressing them on the field, not personally, but I mean, I'm hard on them because I want them to feel it. And then when they get on the field, they feel like, okay, this is it, you know. And I think that's the sign of a good coach. So I don't know where we started with the conversation, but yeah, I think Julian is in the game. You saw what we see in practice, and that's a good sign. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, guys. Yep.
There's a lot of speculation thrown around. Do you want to do it then? I can't right now, but I was going to say, what if
Yeah, you said that.
I'll give you a little.
Sure, I did.